All right, here to help us break down the boogeyman three letters. He did it last time with CRT. He's going to do it this time with DEI. He's a noted author of the book you're seeing over his right shoulder. If you're watching on YouTube, it's called Personal Foul Against the NFL, Roughing Black Bodies. He's also the sociology chair at UNC-Greensboro. He's one of our favorites here. He's been on the show a bunch, Dr. Stephen Cureton. Dr. Cureton, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping back on the program with us.
Absolutely. Haven't spoken to you guys, I guess, since 2022 when we talked about mass shooting. So it's good to be back.
That's
Good to
right.
be back.
A lot has changed since that. We can get on that on another topic, but I would love for people to go check out that episode and what we talked about in that one. But for this one, I want to ask you just at the start. You heard me kind of allude to it there about the three initials that have been making every chyron across news outlets everywhere. And you and I, we were talking about this off air about the exchange I saw with you on Twitter with somebody else, kind of talking about DEI with respect to the NFL. And then I reached out to you and I was like, you're kind of one of the first people I thought of when all of this started making headlines. So just real quick on an onset, on personal level, when you started seeing the first stories coming out about DEI, your first reaction was,
The assumption that it was strictly something that put policies that put unqualified people, particularly Black people, in positions that qualified whites thought they should have. And so it was an issue of who had the better brain power, so to speak. And it also brought to my attention that there is just the assumption that if you lose out on a position, you had to lose out for a reason other than you yourself as a white male, heterosexual male, because they are the center, and everything else is standard deviation from that. That somehow, some way, it had to be a policy and not your ability. It's almost as if DEI has been used as a crutch, but I really want to define the term because folks are assuming it to be a lot of things. So when we talk about diversity, it refers to the presence of difference within a setting, work setting, social setting, whatever. When we talk about equity, it's about understanding that people have differences, but you use accommodations, not quota systems, accommodations to put them in the best position for an outcome within a particular setting, particular job setting. And then when you start talking about inclusion, you're talking about the idea that individuals need to feel valued and respected for the differences that they bring. Over the past, say, or say yearly, companies have spent about $8 billion on DEI, but they've also profited on it. The biggest misconception is that it's helping marginalized groups. Now, marginalized groups have benefited from DEI at 4%. White women have benefited from DEI at 19%. So they are the ones that are getting the best outcomes for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's a big misconception with respect to what DEI is, just promoting all these marginalized groups. It is indeed, just in my mind, an extension of first it was woke that dominated the narratives. Then it became critical race theory. So, in my mind, as a sociologist, whoever controls the narrative of what things are, they can change the definitions of things and make it seem like it's something that it's not. So when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you talk about Trump's executive order uh, prohibiting diversity, equity, and inclusion, because he's talking about we want to get back to merit. The groups that are marginalized, the groups that is supposed to um, take away their positions, if you will, they've all had the talk. You got to be better than, twice as good as people in front of you to get half as much. So when we start talking about merit, I can't think of any quote unquote marginalized, and I hate to use the word marginalized. I always use other. So the center of it all is a white male heterosexual. Anything outside of that is a standard deviation from what is considered the center. So women, minorities, people who have different sexual identities, those are the kinds of individuals that folks are saying, okay, this DEI stuff is something scary. When you think about the recent tragedy with Delta Airlines and the helicopter crashing. Before there was any evidence of anything, DEI was thrown out there. So now DEI is the boogeyman, the shadow, the lurking that frightens people from reason, if you will, about what's really, really going on.
Doctor, just since we're talking about the sociology department for a moment, what does it look like if you're not in the United States of America? If we're trying to learn anything about the development of our society from a sociological perspective, from a scientific perspective, mm-hmm. What's the cost if we try to do it from a place of, I guess, colorblindedness, or if we're not, if the center really is white heterosexual male, what then becomes the cost if we're trying to create what best could be considered a sanitized curriculum in sociology?
Well, it is, and I'm glad you said sanitized, because it's definitely taking away the idea that students should be free to pursue knowledge, no matter what source it comes from. There is an element, this is why the professors are up in arms, of feeling like there's a degree of censorship. What those who are in the center will say is that, no, it's not about just white male heterosexuals. It's about merit. That's the word. That's the code word. It's about merit. And these are the things that must be in place in terms of merit. Now, we know that marginalized populations, whatever realm you're talking about, we know that these folks are qualified. And yes, there are some situations where people do quota systems and things of that nature. But when you're in a position such as myself, being an African-American male, or you're teaching classes that you think are important, not just about race, but there's feminist ideology, there's queer sociology, there's all sorts of things that allow people to develop and understand what an inclusive society should look like. What's happening now is, again, an element of sanitizing and dictating what these students should and should not learn. There's a lot more going on this campus, and in many respects, these students are not taking it well, that all of a sudden these classes that they value will no longer be available in the form that they enrolled in it for. Can we learn anything by sanitizing a curriculum? I don't think so. I think everybody's history is important. Now, again, what you'll hear folks say, whether you pay attention to Fox News or pay attention to CNN, is we're all Americans. Now, if that were true, that we're all Americans, we wouldn't have, as Eddie Glaude would say, a value gap reality. The value of a white life is still valued over anything that's different from a white life, particularly a white male heterosexual life. The Southern strategy, like Michelle Alexander pointed out, which basically says, you have a situation where you're putting folks who should be competitive cohorts against one another, and it takes away their attention from what the rich and powerful are actually doing. You have a situation where you want to start talking about this idea of what a true American is. And a true American means that you are not supposed to express your level of disgruntledness about how the society is treating you. You're not supposed to express your level of wanting more and deserving the opportunity to get more. And if not, if you're trying to push this country to live up to its own billing, its own standard that it points out in the Federalist Papers, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution, for all of those people who are constitutionalists, when you're pushing this country to live up to its word, it's almost as if you don't even have a right to do that. And that those who are in a seat of power, they have the ultimate integrity, they have the ultimate morality, they have the ultimate Christian faith to make the best decisions for everybody else. Now, we're supposed to trust at some point in time that they'll get around to doing what's right for everyone. And so with respect to that, DEI gets pushed to the side. The woke agenda gets pushed to the side. Whether you're left or right, gets pushed to the side. And then you can have a phenomenon like Donald Trump, and I do refer to the president as phenomenon because it's the reality that facts no longer matter. And in an educational system, an environment, I tell my students all the time, social facts, whether it's your lived social facts, those things feed into a body of knowledge. And this is why I don't like the reality of trying to sanitize people. So yes, there are things that you can learn from white male heterosexuals equally that you can learn from any other group of people, no matter how they identify, because they're bringing their lived experiences to the classroom. And that's what I love about my students. And I always point to my students, like, don't discount how you grew up, the culture in which you were raised in, and how that will feed into your body of knowledge and how it becomes a worldview. If you don't allow students to bring their lived experiences into the classroom and they can't immediately understand it, then everything else becomes this abstract reality. And so when you say sanitize something, you're watering it down, you're pushing people on what they should or should not think. It's an attempt to hide some very significant things about our reality. Some will argue that if you're not sanitizing anything, what you're doing is you are removing the guilt complex from quote unquote so-called people who are in the center on white people, that the woke agenda, the critical race theory agenda, the now DEI is the attempt somehow to replace those who have their natural sort of disposition, which is to be the center, and that any other discussion is the blame game. It's not factual, and it is in fact taught in a way that makes white people feel guilty. And that's not the purpose of it. The purpose is to talk to students about their reality and what they're going to walk into. Any marginalized group of people, they've had to have a talk that's different from people who are in the center. And in many respects, it's about safety and security of the mind, safety and security of location, safety and security of where you want to go to school, what city you can live in, the legislators you vote for, policy implications, and all those things.
You know, I'm so glad you mentioned some of that, because as you were talking, Nick and I were kind of nodding along, if you noticed, on one of your answers there. One of the common refrains that I've heard back on the pushback, and it's mostly been on social media. I haven't heard it really on some of the political panels or things like that discussed on cable, that when people do say DEI, just replace it with Black, right? Like, you're just saying that. But you've kind of outlined here, DEI is beyond Black. It affects all three of us on this call. It affects women that we may know, that we've grown up with, that have nurtured us and cared for us and stuff like that. I would love for you to kind of give a counter retort message to the people that are going out there and trying to educate others about the benefits of DEI. I mean, look, there's once upon a time, you know, I was 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, where the president mentioned somebody who I happened to be on a panel on, and he didn't pick on me, picked on the other person. So you never know who may see this or hear this. So for you that is teaching this to America's next wave of youth that are coming into the workplace and stuff like that, what's the counter message to why DEI is really going to impact the large majority outside of the singular white male? Like, what should be that message that they should be championing? So that way we can kind of break down these connotations of these 3-letter, you know, phrases that for some reason one political party has used against, which is really something that we should be all about, including others, right? And making it more diverse, so that way the pool of candidates that we're choosing from is everybody. Everybody has a chance to compete for this. So you're truly picking the best person. What's the best counter message that you would recommend?
Glad you asked me that question. And again, this is why I don't take language for granted. And I opened up about what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. You know, you're talking about just inclusion in and of itself. You're looking at the value of people around you. And what can you do to have that value contribute and make lives better, whether it's academically, whether it's in a job situation, whether it's in a social setting, whether it is religion. So when you think about What inclusive is bringing in ideas to benefit the ultimate good, to benefit a mutual benefit association of people, to bring about consensus. When you think about equity, you're thinking about the idea that there are some differences in people, but with respectful accommodations that don't replace, here's the thing, don't replace take away another person's job. It just puts you in a position of having to compete. And when you think about diversity, because we live in a diverse reality, and I know we're in a sort of political realm where it's America first, but America is very diverse. So when I hear people talk about, okay, there is this boogeyman about it, so you have to say, okay, there is more than likely a DEI policy that benefited your mom, your sister, or even your daughters, because these are the people that are benefited from it from the most. Now, most people they don't care about the facts. They care about, is there going to be an other taking something that's rightfully mine? And they'll say it's about merit. And I always go to the sociological study where you put two resumes beside one another, and it's the same education, the same job experience, and all you do is you manipulate the names. You could have a black sounding name and a white sounding name, and they both have equal merit in terms of job experience and in terms of education, same schools, all things GPA. White sounding names get a higher callback than black sounding names, even though there is this reality that on paper they're the same. So again, I understand where people want to hire those who fit into quote unquote this social networks. That's the idea of soft skills, how that person fits in. So what I would say is understand what DEI actually is by definition, and how it's not a quota system, how it's expanding the view of competition, and then the best person, truly the best person in an expansive field will win out.
Doctor, to that point, when we talk about the leaning toward a meritocracy, the three of us have something in common, is that we're all in some form or another have a relationship with football. Both you and Mike have done it professionally. For me, it's just been a fan for probably well over 30 years at this point. So I draw this analogy for this reason. So in the league, you have legacy ownership, the Rooneys, the Davis family, the Maras. How do we reconcile this idea of meritocracy when there's the ever presence of nepotism? When we see, and I mean, Mike, our Raiders, our new head coach hired his son to be an offensive assistant. That's not to say he's not qualified. There's that word again. But we can safely say that his visibility is partly because of who his father is in that role in the team. How do we reconcile the idea of meritocracy when we've seen essentially other benefits that have been meted out in the form of legacy admissions in colleges, nepotism, as I just demonstrated, and these other opportunities that people get simply for who they are?
I mean, we all understand, we've heard this before. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And nepotism is a prime example of that. As parents, we work to put our kids in a better position. And we've done some things to put them at an advantage. We want them to live better. But we also recognize that we are practicing a different type of agency because we're not positioning our kids without preparing them to be in that position. Nepotism at its highest level, when you start talking about owners of football teams, you're talking about people who are being promoted based on their soft skills. My father is this, my grandfather is this runs in my family. And you're putting these kids, young people, in profession and in charge of grown men's lives because they've seen how their father do things, or they've seen how the family member do things, or this is a family-owned business. And don't get me wrong, I can understand when you make money and you put yourself in a position and you are an owner, you're entitled to make whatever choice you want. And if nepotism is one of those choices, that's fine. But don't then turn around and say it's about merit. If we want full transparency, you just simply tell people this part is about my family, and these are the positions that are reserved for my family. It's nothing to do with merit. It has to do with who they know. Get it out in the open. Stop pretending. Because once you start saying all this stuff is about merit, then it opens up the floodgates to think that the Rooney Rule is somehow a legitimate or illegitimate policy. That DEI, that affirmative action, all these things are somehow some sort of nefarious policy that's taking away people's entitlements. And what it really is, it's just an argument that takes the eye off the ball. Like the idea that true merit, this meritocracy, is reserved just for the competition class. It doesn't have anything to do with ownership. And this is nothing new or inventive. This is sociology, straight up Karl Marx, the haves and the have-nots, the elites and the subordinates in a capitalistic society. What is sort of the common ground? The common ground is, and I believe this in certain locker rooms because I played football at least up to the college level. Common ground is a common goal of success. The common goal of successful football teams is to win games. And you have people from diverse backgrounds who compete under one uniform, under one marcher, one culture, and they understand that the goal is winning. Do they have to be friends? Do they have to have the soft skills, the social networks that are there to make them jive as family members? No, they don't have to do that, but you get confused when you hear NFL teams say it's about family. It's about culture. And so what happens is it just confuses even the most reasonable fan about, okay, if it's about all these things, then it's about merit, and anything that's jumping in the way of merit, like the Rooney Rule, because that's next on the chopping block, believe it or not. Anything like DEI, where they're taking positions from or scholarships from me, or I should be in this position, but they have these quotas. The idea is, okay, why would they have these quotas? What is the federal government doing to promote these types of things? So it's taking the eye off the ball between those who are struggling for the same type of resources. And the resources that we're struggling for within our similar cohort is me against other professors. It's not me against the chancellor. It's not me against land grant institutions. It just basically bottles up the competition and keep our focus on bickering with one another and basically competing for or struggling for those resources while we're over here doing this, continuing to win and build a legacy for our family for generations to come. And so it's I don't see the issue with the idea of doing something for my daughter. Flawed nepotism is that when you're doing it, you're just giving it to them because they are a family member, but they're not qualified to be in that position. You're setting things up for failure. So when we think about nepotism, there is this true nepotism where you're putting individuals in a position to continue a legacy, but they've been socialized, trained, and got the education and the coaching experience to do that, right? They've been an apprentice, not somebody who's playing around, running around, and just, having a good time. They've been a true apprentice. And you are so sure that they've been a true apprentice that you can put their resume out and let people look at what they've done, how they've come up through the ranks. And they just got an edge because, again, they're family members. Let's be honest about that.
Yep. That's the problem. No, and you said it pretty well, because there's tons of examples, like you mentioned in the NFL. Kyle Shanahan's a perfect example, who worked his way up and now is the 49ers coach. And obviously he's gotten to the Niners, to the Super Bowl a couple of times. But Mark Davis with our Raiders, as Nick and I know, somebody who was not doing anything with Al Davis, and the team just got handed to him. And now he's the general manager and owner. I did want to pivot to actually staying with the NFL, something we like to ask authors because you've got the book over your right shoulder there. Like I mentioned, Personal Foul Against the NFL, Roughing Black Bodies. You can go get it wherever books are sold. But I love asking authors this question, and it kind of funnels into the conversation holistically. But right now, somebody's in a bookstore. You see them about to grab the book. You tap them on the shoulder, say, "Hey, I actually wrote that book." "Oh yeah, what's it about?" How do you respond to them? What is the book about? Take us inside Personal Foul Against the NFL.
That's a great question. So it looks at the NFL's 105-year history of policies and cultural mandates, and basically how they treat minority, particularly African American, as a commodity more than a human being. And so we look at the 102-year history from when it was segregated to integrated, all the way up through where we are right now. This season's 103rd season's kickoff, because the book came out in 2024. So the book is about how the NFL has treated its highly employable athlete, and then the difference is how they treat them when it comes to what you think about them intellectually, in positions to make decisions, from a head coaching position or from an administrative position, an executive. The book concerns itself with the reality that when you think about equality in the NFL owners and the hiring process, there are strange bedfellows. So one of the takeaway from the book, and this frustrates me to no end, and it frustrated me to find out, is that those people who are in positions where you think they would want to solve the problem of Black head coaches are the ones who are creating problems to keep it status quo. So I just name the positions, and I don't throw the names of the people. People can Google it. So if you have a senior vice president for diversity, if you have the Fritz Pollard Alliance, and you have those individuals who you think with the Fritz Pollard Alliance saying, "Hey, we are there to make things equitable," but you hear them tell you to your face, "Our job is to protect the owners," it throws you like, okay, wait a minute. You're the Fritz Pollard Alliance. You're supposed to be looking for the good of the body. If you are understanding that the Rooney Rule is running sham interviews where they're not necessarily going to hire anybody, then why would certain coaches take those interviews anyway? And this is one of the reasons why I really, really, really respect Aaron Glenn for not taking the interview with the Patriots, because he knew what the reality was with that. So one of the things that I would say about the book is it will surprise you about how many Black people in positions of power, particularly Black men, are standing in the way of progress and holding hands with team owners while doing it, but then turning around and going out in public and saying, "We're here to help solve the problem." You can't and you won't solve the problem, because it would mean actually losing your job. So the book is informational in the sense that it's not personal opinion. It's the sociology of the NFL. It's about race norming, which is shocking, which is the NFL's biggest roughing the Black body situation. When you start talking about the intellectual competency of Black athletes, their ceiling of thought is actually the floor of white male athletes, if that makes sense. And so that's how a lot of them are not qualifying for the benefits that are associated with CTE. That's that race norming thing that they did for 10 to 12 years. And now it's in the court system. And imagine going to court where the NFL and judges decide your fate, and you as NFL players can't even be in that room. That's roughing the Black body. The idea that you're continuing to treat them as commodity more so than the humanity that deserves. So I called on the commissioner to say the embrace that you give these athletes when they're draft picks, give them the same embrace as a lead when they're done playing and they're meeting you in terms of they risk their lives. Give them the same benefit of reality that if they can play for you, they can be in a position to coach the next generation of athletes. And the reality is that's just not happening, and it's not all the way on the owners. It's on those who are, particularly African Americans, in positions of powers, sharing the same type of agenda to keep things the status quo each and every hiring cycle.
This is why I love podcasts, Nick, because you can't get that on a 6-7 minute segment on television. Dr. Stephen Cureton, like I mentioned, we love having him on the program. He's a sociology chair over at UNC-Greensboro. He's also the author of the book. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it right now on full screen, Personal Foul Against the NFL, Roughing Black Bodies. Go get the book wherever books are sold. Dr. Cureton, I'm so appreciative of every time we reach out to you, you respond, you hop on the show. I can't thank you enough. Continued success to you with the book, and please stay safe.
All right. Thanks so much.